Hi, everyone. Hi. I think we've got people coming through from the waiting room, so thanks very much for bearing with us while we just got set up. I think we're expecting around 50 or 60 people to join us, and I think we're up to about 20. So let's just give it a couple of seconds more just to see who comes in at the last minute. Still a few people in the waiting room being let through. There's still more people in the waiting room coming into the call, so we'll just give it a couple more seconds. Brilliant. Right, well, let's make a start because there's no more people in the waiting room. And it's great to see so many of you with us today. I can see lots of people from the FCERM community, including from JBA and some of our supply chain and clients. So it's lovely to see you all. My name is Maxine Zaidman. I'm an associate director with JBA, and I'm sure most of you know who JBA are, but I'll just give you a very potted history of us as a company. We are a 30-year-old company who specialise in flood risk management. We've also worked quite widely in water resources and ecology as well, so we're a multidisciplinary company. But what we really wanted, or we're very excited rather, to be actually with you today to talk about something that's quite close to my heart, which is leadership. So I'm really pleased and delighted that I'm joined today by Rachel Sullivan, who is a leadership coach and trainer. And Rachel's been working with JBA for quite a long time to help upskill our leaders. And we've got an amazing leadership program, and she's very kindly agreed to join me today to talk about this topic of cognitive empathy. We've got 60 minutes. It's going to be hopefully quite interactive. What we'd like you to do is use the chat if you've got any comments or any observations that you want to share as we talk through. We're going to have some polls and breakouts, so you'll have a chance to talk to some of the other people on the call. And we're going to have a discussion session right at the end. So if I can invite you to use the chat, if you've got any questions as we work through, we'll keep an eye on the chat. We might not see your questions straight away, but we'll try to answer them as they come up. And we'll also be asking you to put some of your comments and feedback and feelings in the chat as we go through. But if we keep to time, there'll be an opportunity for wider questions at the end. So I've mentioned that I'm really excited, or we're really excited to be giving this talk on cognitive empathy. And it might be a term that you've not actually come across before. So we'll start off by giving you a really clear, usable definition of what cognitive empathy is. And one of the objectives today is to really set out how cognitive empathy varies or differs from emotional empathy, which is something that you might be more familiar with. And we're going to share with you some tips and a framework for how you can use cognitive empathy in your day-to-day without becoming overwhelmed. And we'll finish off with some guidance on how you can use the techniques that we go through today in your day-to-day, whether you're managing a team yourself or you're a team leader. But one of the focuses and one of the reasons why we thought this topic was really interesting, and one of the reasons we wanted to present it as part of Flood and Coast, is the really joined up way that FCERM projects work with multiple companies and partners working together. So there's a top-down collective leadership in a lot of FCERM projects. But the other part of this and the other aspect to it is really working with flood risk and communities that have been flooded, and the emotionality of people who've been involved in flooding and how that impacts us as people working on FCERM projects and leading FCERM projects. So I think it's a real topical and important topic for us to be talking about. Hopefully you agree, and that's why you're here. So Rachel, I'm going to hand over to you, if that's okay, to get us started.
Thank you. And so before we start, I thought it'd be quite useful if you could all just drop in the chat a simple yes or no if were already familiar with that term cognitive empathy before you signed up for this session. So just give us an idea of, did you already know the term cognitive empathy before you signed up? Simple yes or no. There is absolutely no right or wrong. I'm loving seeing a load of no's, which is brilliant because it all means that you're going to learn something today. And look, when I first came across the term cognitive empathy, I was actually doing some work on how to make psychological safety more palatable for working construction and high risk environments. And I was looking at Professor Amy Edmondson's work, and I must admit, when I first heard the term cognitive empathy as a really nice way into psychological safety, I thought, well, me and Maxine had a bit of a giggle. Like that sounds a bit like buzzword bingo. And the thing is, though, when you properly get into it and understand what cognitive empathy is, you realise that it is one of the most practical leadership skills in technical high stakes work, which is why Maxine and I are super excited to talk to you about this this phrase cognitive empathy today. So over to you, Maxine. Let's start with a poll to see where people are at.
Yeah, it's great. So yeah, we're going to launch a poll. Liv's going to help us with that, so that should be popping up in a minute. And it's really to understand, really, perhaps what feels most challenging for you right now in terms of the FCERM projects you're involved with. So specifically, and as we've got on there, what makes collaboration hardest in FCERM projects? So it's a kind of voting form, if you like, for the poll. We've got other on there at the end. So if there's something on the list that isn't standing out to you, but there's something else you'd like to mention, do tick others and pop perhaps some more details in the chat if you want to. So what we're seeing, so we're getting a really strong response, Rachel, on conflicting priorities. That's really standing out to a lot of people. And I think the other thing that seems to be coming up is lack of trust, which is quite interesting. And it'd be good if anyone wants to pop in the chat to expand on any of that a little bit more. And community resistance, which is one of the things that I thought would come up quite strongly, is running about 44%. So it's really interesting what we're seeing there.
Yeah, and we'll build on these and how
Yeah,
cognitive empathy addresses these throughout this hour that we've got
yeah,
together.
yeah.
Um, Thank you for sharing that, Liv. If you could, let's just shut that poll away. So let's jump into it. So in technical industries, empathy is sometimes misunderstood as being soft or perhaps overly emotional. But when working on projects where success depends on cross-disciplinary collaboration, community trust, ethical decision making, and understanding competing perspectives, like was just mentioned there, I really want to get this across. Empathy is not a soft skill. When it's employed correctly, it's a really strategic skill. And when we're looking at cognitive empathy, this is the definition that I really like to use when I'm working with groups of senior leaders and on people on really high stakes projects. So cognitive empathy is the ability to understand another person's perspective. So that's how they see the situation and what matters most to them without needing to feel their emotions. So, to make it really simple, if you like, cognitive empathy is the thinking side of empathy. It's that ability to see the world through another person's eyes so that we can communicate more effectively on complex stakeholder projects or where there's competing priorities, where we can make better decisions, reduce conflict, and build trust, which of course helps lead to psychological safety. And in leadership, that is an incredibly strategic skill to have. Back over to you, Maxine.
on mute there. The way I'm seeing this, Rachel, is that there's a really big distinction between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. So the cognitive part is really about understanding someone's perspective, isn't it? And it's not falling into the trap of kind of absorbing their
Yeah.
emotions. I've kind of interpreted that in the right way. And it's definitely true in my experience that having too much emotional empathy can actually put people at risk of being overwhelmed and perhaps losing objectivity. So especially if we're dealing with people who have had really traumatic experiences of being flooded, and how do we get on and do our job amongst that without absorbing that absorbing that pain, essentially, is what you're saying, isn't it? And
Yeah.
there's this real balance that we have to take in FCERM about being technically robust and making sure that we deliver work that stands up to scrutiny, that really looks at all the answers, that is objective, but also being human centered, so appreciating, what people are going through, and actually building on that emotion. So that's the whole driver for the whole project in a way, and actually understanding where that emotion comes from, so what their fear is, really, to actually design better solutions. So not getting caught up in the emotional empathy for its own sake, but actually thinking, okay, what does that tell us? How can we use that, and understanding their perspective, how does that actually build us to do a better job in the end, for whatever technical aspect we're doing, whether it's designing something, whether it's thinking about whatever solution it is, really.
Yeah, that's absolutely it, Maxine. And I think one of the most important things that I want you all watching this today to come away from today is to really raise your awareness of what type of empathy you are feeling and experiencing, and really being more self-aware in environments where perhaps there's really high stress, perhaps there's community involvement where there's a lot of emotion going on, or maybe you're on a deadline in a high risk, high stakes project that's going over budget and tensions are getting high. And in these situations, the goal isn't to feel more empathy. I think when we think about more emotional empathy, it's often unhelpful in high stakes environments. What we want is better awareness and more utilization of the right type of empathy in that moment that's going to get the best outcomes in that situation for all involved, and to really respond intentionally. The best leaders that I'm working with at the moment are those ones that are self-aware enough to understand what they're emitting, and what they're experiencing at that moment. And they're also emotionally intelligent enough to respond intentionally, in a way that helps everybody involved reach those best outcomes. And I don't know if you're seeing this in your team at the moment, Maxine, but I'm seeing this in all companies that I'm working with at the minute. I mean, let's be honest, the world is crazy at the minute. Like, it is stressful, and it can be very easily to be emotionally overloaded just watching the news, for example, let alone when we think about cost of living and things like that. On our daily lives. But really, when we're thinking about emotional empathy, too much emotional empathy in teams can sometimes lead to overwhelm, emotional exhaustion, blurred boundaries around what's enough, and objectivity, and a lot of reactivity in decision makings, especially when the pressure's really on and they're not always the best decisions. And a nice switch into cognitive empathy helps us to stay curious, stay objective, and keep thoughtful rather than closed off to new information, and to be much more effective under pressure. And that is absolutely fundamental for how we need to operate and work in today's environment. And this is something you really try and do at JBA, isn't it, Maxine? I'm going to let you do this slide, because I know I do teach this in JBA, but I'm really curious to hear how it lands and works in practice.
Yeah, and as you said, Rachel, this this concept, I think there's perhaps a perception that you might potentially be a bad person if you don't absorb other people's emotion, or kind of pick up on what they're going through. And that's, we're not saying not to do that, but what we're really saying is to think objectively about it. And actually the cognitive bit is the real key, isn't it? That it's actually how you take that information and deal with it. So there's some very deliberate things that you can do to kind of help yourself shift from this really kind of tying into the emotional empathy, but and peeling that back and coming back to the just kind of remembering the cognitive thing. So it's been detached in a little way, and I think this is, and as you've said, Rachel, I think we are seeing a need for this. I can think of examples in our supply chain and our clients, but it's a really good tool just for kind of day-to-day management of a team. You know, there's so much pressure within teams to be an amazing, understanding team leader, and actually the best way that you can do that is to really learn these tools to shift into this into this cognitive empathy mindset. So some of the things that you can do, as we've got on the slide here, is really just to not to rush in is one of the key things, isn't it, Rachel? So don't rush to solve the problem or to find the solution. It's about listening, asking the question, almost standing back and saying and recognizing that they've got this emotional weight that they're carrying, but being really clear that it doesn't detract from that if you decide not to take that on yourself, or to be deliberate about not absorbing that. So a lot of it's to do with this reflection aspect, isn't it? So thinking about focusing on the facts, focusing on the feelings, and perhaps replaying that back to the individual. So, you know, questions like, what does that mean to you? There's some coaching that happens in there a little bit, isn't there, Rachel, within that?
Yeah, and what we talk about when we do this with leaders is, before you absorb that emotion and jump straight into action, it's that really getting curious about what might be going on from their perspective, or what might be driving their perspective. Is there anything that you're not aware of? And like you just said then, Maxine, it's really separating out the emotion from the information. Anybody that's got young kids will know that that's quite hard to do sometimes, but it's a really, really useful skill to get into, that not all emotion is your weight to carry. And just being more aware of that, you know, when you've got an upset stakeholder or an angry team member, that before you jump into action, to pause, to get curious, to separate out the fact from the emotion, and then, like you said, Maxine, to reflect back, that you have clarified what's going on for them before you help them to problem solve.
Yeah, and this isn't an easy skill to learn, you know. So we're investing very heavily within JB, and this is, you know, one of the things that Rachel's helping us with, and one of the reasons why we wanted to give this talk today, because, you know, reflecting, you know, the little question we asked at the beginning, were you even aware of cognitive empathy? And it's perhaps something that doesn't come up in the day to day. So one of the things that we've been really trying to do is plant the seeds of this idea through our leadership training, to make sure that we are thinking about this side of it, and part and parcel of building emotional intelligence as a leader is to be able to kind of separate these things, and recognizing that this kind of human side of leadership is really just as important as the technical side. Sorry, I jumped in there with a bit of an aside there, Rachel, but we're going to launch a poll. Is this a poll now we're on now? I can't remember where we are.
No, just a discussion and a reflection. If people want to use the chat, more than welcome. We'll go and talk through.
Yeah, and there's no right and wrong answers that we're looking for here. We're just kind of asking really you guys to give us some examples really about if you are aware of how you behave in terms of being empathic with others, and if you have noticed having having explained perhaps what the difference is between them, if you can think of examples where you've actually um, employed a difference, and perhaps some of the um, approaches you use for yourself to actually employ that. So perhaps you're doing this anyway without that title of cognitive empathy. So what do you do when people get overloaded emotionally around you, whether that's your team members or people in the general public, or people that are really just passionate about water quality issues, or really people that are passionate about anything and because of their personal experiences.
Yeah, so feel free to just use the chat, and maybe now you've got this language, if you just kind of could drop in there, are you actually quite good already at doing cognitive empathy, or do you tend to, in certain situations, get pulled into emotional empathy, and maybe just drop a note or two in around when you feel yourself getting more pulled into emotional empathy, and maybe when you are good at using cognitive empathy. I think for me, particularly Maxine, it's when other people angry or upset and emotions are high, I really have to work to not jump in with an emotional response myself, either emotional empathy or emotion reaction, and I have to do that pause and reflect and reframe, to check myself into cognitive empathy. A nice reminder that I always like to play with is to remind myself, am I having an emotion or am I being had by an emotion? And that kind of subject object language of, recognizing I'm having emotion versus becoming that emotion is a nice way for me to think about cognitive empathy. We've got a couple of people in the chat. Do you want to have a look at those, Maxine?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of people who are actually saying they do really well with cognitive empathy, especially during meetings, but actually perhaps so I think what I'm reading from the comments in the chat is that actually people find it quite easy to, or have experience of thinking about empathy in the cognitive, from a cognitive perspective at work or in the work environment, but perhaps when they're dealing with people individually, one-to-ones, or things in their personal life, they find it much harder to do that, and then kind of slip back into the emotional empathy being dominant. So that's really interesting, isn't it? That people are managing to separate work and life a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
it's really nice. And there's a bigger
yeah,
place for emotional empathy in family life as well. Absolutely. Like that's where it should sit more. So that's a really nice split. Absolutely.
yeah, and Sam's made a really great comment in the chat saying that it depends on actually how important the issue is to her herself. So uh, and that might impact how you react to a situation. And again, Zoe's reflected that as well. She's saying if you know the person personally, then it makes it very much harder to stay on that path of standing back, because you are invested in that person and really care about them. Um,
Yeah,
so
massively.
and we're definitely not pushing the message here, are we, about that emotional empathy is a bad thing. What we're just trying to say is knowing when you are using that, and deliberately knowing when you shouldn't use that, or that shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's it. When which
Yeah,
one's appropriate.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, absolutely. And like you said though, and what Sam had said, it's how high the stakes are. I've worked in um construction and engineering environments where there has sadly been tragedies at work, and there's a place there for real emotional empathy, um, on the learnings and the risk assessment and the what we do about it and holding that weight. We also need cognitive empathy in those situations, as well, to understand how we can mitigate those risks for other people as well. So it's really about being able to do both, but raising your awareness of when you do which one. Um, and I mentioned this in the introduction, but I think there's a real beauty in understanding when and how to apply cognitive empathy. Because what I've noticed is at the minute, psychological safety is becoming, well, for probably the last year, it's been an increasing buzzword, and a lot of companies have really focused in on psychological safety. And it's because the world is very psychologically unsafe at the minute. Um, and I'm not saying that JBA Maxine, absolutely not, but some companies that when I do talks about psychological safety, you can see a few eye rolls occasionally. And I always think when you're having to talk about it a lot, it means it's not been role modeled necessarily well enough. And I think what the beauty of cognitive empathy is, especially with doing it without using the label of naming it and saying, oh, we're going to, do cognitive empathy now, is that psychological safety is the natural byproduct of leaders that can demonstrate cognitive empathy really well. Um, because if you are somebody, either a team leader, leading a project work or client work, or just even a colleague or a stakeholder, being able to do cognitive empathy well has the result that people feel both seen and heard. And you need to be both seen and heard to trust somebody and to feel acknowledged. And this leads us to these amazing benefits of collaboration, innovation, inclusion, and of course, better decision making, which would naturally lead to everybody feeling more psychologically safe. Now, I can, imagine that you're all thinking, yeah, but how do I do it? And how do I do this and remind myself in moments around how to practice cognitive empathy? So these are three questions that I like to ask myself, and that when we're working with leaders at JBA that we teach on our programs. And they're really useful to do in this order because you will see they go down in order of when conflict gets higher. So the first question that I think we can really ask to shift conversations is going in with curiosity around what might this person be seeing that I'm not? And this is a great question to ask yourself when perhaps a team member or a stakeholder keeps pushing back on maybe it's a new process that you're doing, or maybe it's a project you're working on, and you're starting to get that niggle in your head that's like they're just being difficult. And I always take that question. The moment I think somebody's been difficult, I need to look in at myself and ask, why are they resisting? And what am I not seeing? And so what this might sound like is I get the sense that you're concerned about this change. What's the biggest worry about how this would impact the work day to day? What's really nice about that question when it's somebody that's perhaps resisting change is it flips them to what they like about the status quo to have they actually tried to implement the change, because you're asking them about the biggest worry that they're seeing. And that gives you a springboard into really nice collaboration after. Question two, another favourite of mine, and I like to use this one when, let's say, emotions are running high, or there's been a reaction that's quite strong emotionally in a meeting, perhaps about a project delay. And again, I always think in these kind of questions, the cue is in your internal reaction. If I start to think, oh God, they're overacting a bit, and that's a bit out of proportion, that's a little cue for myself to say, well, what matters most to them right now? And by exploring and just getting yourself curious about what really matters most to them right now, we're looking to discover what perhaps are the other things that are going on right now. How this might sound in the working day might be, I can see that this is important to you. What's the biggest pressure or concern from your side at this moment? Now, of course, it might be that your boss has overpromised an outcome to others, or they're carrying stress that you can't see. The answer to this question will be information that you can deal with in a more constructive way than just labeling somebody as difficult. And then finally, question three is one of my favorite for influencing. So it's really good for influencing. It's also really good for building psychological safety and trust, particularly when you don't agree. So this one might be kind of used when perhaps a stakeholder wants to go faster than you believe is realistic, or the project looks like it's going over budget and they're just saying it needs to come in on budget and there's no wiggle room there. And instead of saying, or perhaps your internal trigger is, well, that just won't work, is paraphrasing around showing that you understand even when you don't agree. So I understand why speed matters here, especially with the deadlines you're under. So we're acknowledging and we're showing empathy, cognitive empathy around the stress that they're under. But my concern is if we rush this stage, we increase the risk of errors later. Can we explore an option that protects both pace and quality? Now, obviously, that's a bit textbook, but you can kind of see how when we're thinking about the people that communicate best, they never disagree outright. We always need to acknowledge pressure, acknowledge their side of the argument, and then pose our argument in another way. This is a really nice way to influence well when you're disagreeing. Try using these and see what shifts. Back over to you, Maxine, for our
Great, okay.
breakout.
Well, let's get the audience involved a bit, Rachel, and I think it's a good opportunity to have a breakout. And let's hope everybody doesn't leave the call at the risk of a breakout. I know some people don't like it, and if you do get into a breakout room and if it's not for you, just leave the room. What we want you to do is really just have a think about where cognitive empathy might have really changed an outcome. So it could be a challenging stakeholder interaction, or perhaps interaction with a colleague or a wider project team, or it might be a community interaction. And just stepping back and employing some of these tools or awareness about cognitive empathy. How might it have made a difference? So what we're going to do is, we've said 7 minutes, 3 minutes debrief. I think we're on time, and I think that's okay. We can still manage that. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. And really, what we want you to do is just chat to the people in your breakout room. We're not expecting you to feedback. We're going to perhaps actually ask you to put some key points in the chat, but it's really just to get a feel, so that you can get a feel for situations that you might find yourself in the future, or others have found themselves in working in FCERM, to kind of get a feel for the types of scenarios where these skills are going to be super useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Liv, will you open those rooms? Do you want to add anything, Rachel, before we just open those rooms?
No. There'll be 3 of you in each room, and Liv's gonna put you all in them now, and they'll close automatically in 7 minutes. So we'll see you shortly. Enjoy.
Right, I think, have we got everybody back? Can someone just give us a hand up or a wave if they're back with us? I'm not quite sure. We're not quite sure whether everyone's still in the breakout rooms or not.
Thanks, Zoe.
So is everyone back with us?
I'll just be back in 10 seconds, Max.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. I was like wondering where everybody was. Right. Brilliant. Those 7 minutes go really fast, don't they? We've just been sitting here having a little chat, and all of a sudden you're back with us. So I hope you found that useful. Kind of wanted to invite you, if you would like to, and if anyone wants to actually contribute verbally, but kind of just encourage you or ask you to let us know what you noticed, or what kind of common themes came up in the discussions that you were having there in the breakouts. and there's kind of no right and wrong answer. We're not expecting or have any preconceived ideas about what you might be telling us, but we've got some themes on the screen that we thought some of the responses might be around. So were there themes coming up around, lack of curiosity, for example, or was it pressure and time constraints? Just wondered if anybody would be happy just to pop in the chat. What were the kind of key things that were driving these situations where you thought really being clear about cognitive empathy would have really made a difference? So Lucy has put making assumptions about what people, communities are thinking. Great, thank you. Ewan's got keep how to balance empathy when there's a major flood, but keeping unclouded decision making, which is another good one. Zoe's mentioned about not having all the information, and coming back to that point about making assumptions, Rachel, that you were talking about. Yeah. Great. Some really useful things there. And we had a nice example where you might actually by necessity already be using cognitive empathy because you haven't been in someone's shoes. So a really great example might be, I know we've got a lot of people on the call who do property flood resilience surveys, for example, and that involves going into people's homes and where there's been flooding in the past. And obviously those homeowners want you to hear their story, and they want to feel heard, and they want their concerns to be recognised in the technical outcomes. But actually the surveyors are there to do a survey, and how do you balance this acknowledging the acknowledgement of someone's experience, but still getting on with the job, and where the boundaries between that is quite difficult. Quite a difficult thing. The other thing that actually has been a really clear message. Last year we were involved in some work with people working through the FCRIP programme, so the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme, and there's been some amazing work being done through that programme, including a lot of community engagement. And one of the themes that came back there was the real and it came back in the sense of people asking for mental health training or support on how to deal with these really difficult situations, Rachel. But it comes back to the emotional weight of being empathic with the people that you're dealing with, and what you take away, and how you deal with that after the conversation's ended.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially when people are doing those community outreach or surveys, you're not often just seeing 1 or 2 people a day. It can be like 8, 9, 10, and it can, when I'm in environments like that, you sometimes feel like you need to have a lay down after, and that's too much emotional overload. And what we really need to think about is, how can we demonstrate more cognitive empathy in those moments, so we can be resilient enough to keep going ourselves as well, which is acknowledging and hearing people's experiences without needing to have felt them ourselves.
Yeah, and not feeling guilty that you haven't felt them yourselves.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're all passionate about making the world a better place. Most of us probably on the call today are in this industry because we want to improve things for other people. We want to protect the environment. We want to make people's lives better. And just because necessarily we haven't been in a situation ourselves, and maybe we have been in those situations, and that's what's driven us. But I think this comes back to this kind of, and I mentioned at the beginning, not feeling guilty because you are using cognitive empathy. It's a real necessity. It's a real necessary thing to be able to do, just to be able to keep yourself doing your job. And if you weren't doing your job effectively, then the whole chain would break.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we're getting to the end. To the end now. I think there's quite a lot we can kind of pulled together here, Rachel, about how we could use cognitive empathy, or to recognise that we're already doing so. I think quite a lot of people in the chat and in discussions today have actually recognised that they are actually doing this either by necessity or by choice, or because it's a technique that they've needed to develop. But cognitive empathy is a really great tool, and it's not just for dealing with stakeholders or communities. It's within teams, and we've touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to, actually, there's lots of things it can help with decision making. We've got on the screen there. Being innovative, including that there's lots that are going to come out or could benefit in the way a project runs just from using cognitive empathy, or thinking about that, or just accepting that it exists, and being able to put a phrase to what you're doing is actually going to be a good takeaway for lots of people, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that we want to leave you with is that cognitive empathy isn't about replacing technical expertise. It's about strengthening technical expertise through better human understanding. And what I wanted to leave you with is 4 questions about what cognitive empathy actually sounds like at work. Like, if you've got a leader that really demonstrates cognitive empathy and as a result psychological safety, what do you want to be listening out for, and how do you want to sound at work so people are saying this about you? And I think these 4 questions are really key. They're small conversational shifts, but they completely change dialogue when you come at it from this level of curiosity. So the first thing is really asking more questions before offering solutions. Anybody that's been on any of my training will know we always say ask more questions, make less statements. But really asking, can you help me understand what matters most to you here, is just a brilliant opener for unlocking cognitive empathy. Reflecting back what you've heard, and that might sound like, what I'm hearing here is reliability and long-term impacts are your biggest concern. Is that right? So again, it's not a statement, it's a question, but it's just a really lovely way of reflecting back what you've heard, and that helps make somebody feel seen and acknowledged. Involving quieter voices, I wonder on this call how many of you actually hear this being said at work enough. When we're in a decision-making meeting, what haven't we heard? Like, we haven't heard from everyone yet. What perspectives might be missing? Like, how often is that said, and how often do you ask that? Like, what are the perspectives that we're missing? And finally, replacing assumption with curiosity. I love that we've got that assumption word in the chat. But what might this situation look like from their side that we haven't considered yet? So what might this situation look like? And that's just a really lovely exercise in testing, taking multiple perspectives. And we're very grateful for all of you spending an hour with us today, but we are totally aware that an hour is not really quite enough time to give you all the useful tools and questions that you could do to make sure cognitive empathy has been used in your day to day. So what Maxine and I have done is just created a quick cognitive empathy toolkit. It's just a 2-page download, a PDF download. And in it, there are some coaching questions, the questions that are on these slides. And there's also a 10-minute exercise that you could do in a meeting or with a stakeholder or a client group, a 10-minute meeting exercise to demonstrate cognitive empathy. And if you are a leader, there are some leadership tips on there. So grab the QR code now if you want to download that guide. Liv will also send it as a follow-up after this session. So we just wanted you to have something to take away that was really useful, that you could use immediately. Just over to you, Maxine, to close.
Yeah, just to reflect what you've said there, Rachel, I'm really pleased to see so many people with us today, and thank you all for um, contributing through the breakout rooms and the polls. I mean, just to circle back really to the driver for us giving this talk, and it is quite difficult on talks like this to kind of shoehorn's not the right word, but this is kind of a mini leadership training session essentially, and it's quite hard to shoehorn that into a kind of technical lunchtime CPD process. But the thing that we really want you to take away is that actually that soft skills and technical skills are not separate things. You don't need to do leadership, or leadership training isn't there, or leadership isn't just about learning how building these softer skills and then keeping that quite separate to your technical ones. Actually, the relational aspect of leadership will help you with your technical work as well. So it's this technical expertise and human understanding and locking them together. Hopefully that came out kind of in the wash in some of your breakout room discussions as well. But I think we have got, I mean, we've got 3 or 4 minutes left. I don't know if anybody has got any questions. We're happy to stay and answer any questions or specific scenarios that anyone's come across that they need a hand with. But if anyone has got any questions, just
either pop them in the chat or come
yeah.
off mic. But any questions around how cognitive empathy could help you better in your role, or help you better collaborate or lead teams or work with stakeholders, we're happy to answer any of them. And then if you want to follow up with either of us after this session around cognitive empathy or psychological safety, our contact details are on the slide, and there's the QR code there if you want to find me on LinkedIn as well. But questions, over to you. I'll let you answer the questions, Maxine.
Well, it depends on what the questions are. It might be a bit beyond me, some of the questions, but we'll see if anyone's got anything.
Hello, I can't find the hand button.
That's okay, just come off mic, that's fine.
Thank you. My name's Sarah. I've just realised it's come up weird on here, my code number and stuff. So I noticed that we focus mainly on design teams. I work in a very weird world of crossing over into design review, regulation, and sit both in design teams and in regulatory teams as well.
Mm-hmm.
How would you apply cognitive empathy to the regulatory side of a business rather than on the design side of a business? What would be your key points? Would they be the same? Would they be slightly different?
Ooh. I can go first, Maxine, then you could jump in.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I think this slide here for the regulatory would be really crucial. I think that first question is really important around what might this person be seeing that I'm not. And what you'd be really wanting to understand then is what are the pressures that they've got on them from a regulatory perspective, and how there might not be an answer of how you balance that so everybody's 100% happy, but that you can acknowledge what's most important from their perspective. And are there any missing perspectives that input their perspective that you're not aware of? Does that make sense? Because they'll have different perspectives that input their perspectives that won't, that you might not be even aware of exist. And I think also that third question is really key around regulatory, because there's going to have to be some give and take on both sides. And it's that, being able to show you've understood, even if perhaps you disagree, or that they're asking for something that is beyond what you can give in that moment, or likewise you're wanting something from them which is beyond what they can give in that moment. How can you always acknowledge what you do understand about their point of view before you go in and present your view? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think we sort of do some of that
I
without
imagine.
realizing what it was. So it's nice to have a
honestly,
name for it.
yeah, it is, and as well, it gives you that like, ah, and when am I not doing that? You know, when am I getting? I think about those things when you start to label somebody like, oh, they're being difficult, or they're not seeing my point of view here. When you find yourself frustrated or emotional at parts, let that be a cue to, I know how to do this. I need to be less emotional and more demonstrating cognitive empathy, and it will make you way more effective. I mean, I'm sure you're already super effective in it if you're doing it already, but just having that word for it allows you to switch on the awareness, the self-awareness quicker, is what we often
Yeah,
find. Yeah, yeah. But brilliant question. Thank you.
that's
There
right.
is a kind of
Sorry.
reverse to this as well, isn't it? Because people working in regulation do get a hard time off the public,
Massively,
and,
massively.
and
Not
actually
just the public, I'd say that
other
design
parts.
teams are
Company.
Yeah,
involved in that as well
yeah,
as their
yeah,
clients.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, this is going to sound horrible, but they need us as much as we need them.
yeah,
And
A
we need
hundred
to work
percent.
together. We are part of their design team.
yeah.
100%. I would be asking them, what are your what are you what else inputs you're thinking that I'm not seeing? It'd be a really nice way to get them on side.
Mm.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
There's a really good question, Rachel, in the chat. So AK has asked, how does cognitive empathy deal with professional guilt from technical decisions? Which is a really interesting one. I'm not sure we can answer that in a nutshell, but
I I really like Brene Brown's recent work on this. AK, if this is something you're finding in your teams, I'd really recommend reading Strong Ground, her latest book, and check out her podcasts. But this is when we talk about when you get an emotional overwhelm. And the guilt that comes along that with some sorry, Strong Ground, not Strong Brown, Strong Ground by Brene Brown. Um, and she talks about whether you're operating above or below the line in these highly emotional decisions. And often when we're below the line, we're being absorbed by, that's the one with, thank you, Maxine, by too much emotional empathy. And of course, we're only human, that will happen to us, but it's really by saying, what is my emotional weight to carry? And what decision did I make with all of the information? And how was there any other information that I would have had that would have changed that decision? And then you can help deal with that in future. Um, I'm just conscious of time and we've got a bit over, but I'll post something on that one on LinkedIn if you find me on there, and I'll make sure I give you some guidance on that for next week. I'll write a note with that.
if
Any other?
if you've not come across Rachel before, I definitely recommend you follow her on LinkedIn. She's got great articles that I find quite useful to follow. I think with technical, just to add my thoughts to that, when you're technically confident or competent and you know that you're making good technical judgments, sometimes and perhaps you've got less confidence on the other kind of more people management or dealing with situations, I think you can overcompensate or try quite hard because you're expecting more of yourself in those situations as well. So I think coming back to cognitive empathy and not expecting too much of yourself, to be empathic to yourself, as well, is quite important. We it's a whole chat in itself.
Massively.
Well, should we draw a line there?
Yeah, and people, of course, can find us on email or LinkedIn, Maxine, if they want to ask any other questions. But thank you so much, everybody. Liv will send the recording and the link to that download if you want to jump in and grab that. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much.